Today's session is an in the file session. We're talking about product design and user research, and I cannot wait to see how we get on. Today's guests are Blake Hodgson, who's a design lead at Maze, and Jolanta Gill, who is the lead UX designer and researcher at Maze as well. I'm going to hand over the floor to those two so they can kick off and show us all the goodies.
Super nice. Thank you. I just might share my screen, get this one working. Where are we? That's a test. Figma, here we go. Lighting test there. I'm glad we're all casual here. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Lovely.
All right. I think we can start. Hey everyone. First of all, we want to start this presentation by saying that we are delighted to be a guest on today's In the File presentation. As you can hear, I'm Yola and I'm here with Blake today. And greetings from sunny Krakow, Poland. Blake is currently in Spain, which is called his second home, right after Australia. We are both lead designer at Maze, where our day-to-day goal is to help people take better and quicker design decisions by reaching out to their end users. Maze is completely remote company. So fun fact is, and we talked about it before, that we never seen each other in person yet, but we'll change that next week. But we see each other regularly through VR games, and Blake is a master of virtual golf. To give you an overview of today's presentation, our topic today will be product design plus rapid testing equal better outcomes. In today's presentation, we'll try to show you how we are trying to incorporate testing and data capture in our design flow to get better results. To explain to you our way of working, we'll give you a broad overview of how we share the work in our cross teams. Next slide, please.
There we go.
And next one, thank you.
Yep. Cool.
Like any other young startups, we're trying to find a process that best suits our needs. At the moment, we are sticking to a 9-week product cycle, but I think as we grow, we might change that as well. But what remains constant is a method of accountability in projects. Before we start working on the project, each team does the estimation of the 4 big risks, and we as our organization allocate them this way. Product manager are responsible for value, product designer are responsible for usability, engineers are responsible for feasibility, and managers are responsible for business viability. During this 9 weeks of producing, everyone is responsible for overall product delivery, but different teams have a different main responsibilities. Product manager are responsible for the value risk, whether customer will buy it or user will choose to use our product. And product designer are responsible for usability risk, whether user will figure out how to use it. Engineers are taking care of feasibility risk, whether our engineer team can build what we need with time, skills, and technology we have. And managers are responsible for business viability risk, whether the solution also work for various aspects of our business. Over the course of 9 weeks, everyone has a role to play, and we work on everything together. And as our mission as a designer is minimize the usability risk as much as we can, we will explain to you how we collect data and conduct ongoing testing to reduce the risk to release better outcomes. I'll start maybe with first part of the process, where and what kind of data we source, so we know where to start and have a clear objective in our minds. So in order to do this, we try to combine multiple research techniques from start to finish at each stage of design process, linking various data points together. Maybe as you know, humans are naturally self-conscious and constantly worried about how others perceive us. That's why it's useful to combine attitudinal data, what users say about our product or what problem they have, with what they actually do in our product by analyzing behavioral data. So we starting with and maybe everyone starting with the generative research would help us deeply understand our user and learn about their needs, wants, and challenges. It will also give us an answer to question what problem might we solve, and we following up with evaluative research that help us to check if the solution we came up with meet those needs, wants, and changes. And it also answer our question how well our solution is working.
There we are. This one? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So to do this, we try to test multiple times throughout the design process, combining multiple techniques and products. You will need to remember that research isn't one-time effort, it's sprinkled across the entire product process. When we start to work on a new project, we try to get as much data as we can. So we analyze behavior in Amplitude and in a Hotjar. We try to interview our customers via Zoom, during which we usually ask the question and then ask them to maybe recreate some things in Figma, which allows the user to better recall some of the steps. We also conduct initial discovery survey that allow us to answer broader question, or we do cross-team brainstorming jam. I love this session. Then we do various concepts in Figma and test them remotely using Maze. This allows us to quickly catch usability bugs and make changes as we go without waiting until the whole big prototype is ready or implemented. This one is not only speed up the development time, but also minimize usability risk and yield better quality product. In the next few slides, Blake, we'll show you how we use this information on our day-to-day work with an example for one of our recent projects.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Yola. So yeah, let's take a look at this process through one of the recent topics that we worked on, and that's the Maze report. So for some context, the Maze report is a feature that allows users to share back their learnings from their tests, either internally with their teams or externally with stakeholders. So as we know, that research relies on a lot of storytelling and bringing people on board with your journey. And so after recent feedback, we found that users were hoping to find a better way to tell a story from their data. Whenever we start a new project, we hold workshops with the team to walk through the data and insights that we have, and also to really define the problem that we're trying to solve. And once we have alignment from the team, we move into sketching and prototyping, and the iterative process of the ideation phase begins. So we frame this challenge with a problem statement and generate a range of how might we's as a springboard for idea generation. And one of these that we started from was how might we help users tell a better story with the data in their Maze report. So the primary goal of building a prototype is to test designs and product ideas before creating real products. And therefore, your product success is directly related to whether you test it or not. And it really is a matter of when and not if your product will be tested, as it will be tested when it becomes available on the market and people begin to start using it. So we can see here at the beginning of the phase, in the sketching phase, we would be more in this very divergent phase of what could be. And as time goes on, it moves into what should be and eventually what will be, as we start to narrow in on a final solution that we will actually release to our customers. So When it comes to testing these ideas, we're largely seeking attitudinal data to assist us to quickly determine the product direction. So it's also beneficial to run these as moderated sessions to gather more subtle responses that we can look into or probe a little bit deeper for whatever people are using when they're starting to review the concepts. So we try to frame these concepts as distinctly as possible, and sometimes because sometimes the sketch might not actually convey everything that's included inside the sketch. So yeah, when we're, I guess, next slide. So yeah, I mean, the goal of this is to really determine the most valuable solution for solving the user needs. And some example questions might be, what are your first impressions of this concept? How likely would you be to use a concept like this? What do you like or dislike about the concept? And how useful would this concept be in your workflow? So we know the general pains or needs from the discovery process in understanding the problem space, but we're trying to use these as stimulus to figure out which ideas are worth pursuing. And from the responses that we collect here, it doesn't mean that we immediately move in that direction, but it does help to facilitate the prioritization of features that we will focus on. So also when presenting concepts, either moderated or unmoderated, it's a great idea to just frame the concept that you're presenting and also add a few different key benefits of what this feature might do. So once we've collected these responses and we've started to solidify a direction, we bring these back to the team so we can start to discuss our approach and start to build on this to create some user journeys. Oh, sorry. This involves mapping out the key areas of the feature that we would like to test or building out an end-to-end experience. So at this stage, we're mostly focusing on the functional aspects. So the general happy paths we expect the user to take with headlines, buttons, and wireframes. I can actually show you one of the prototypes that we were using, which has sort of helped to illustrate this example. So we can see here, it's very basic in terms of the functionality that we have. And we're simply just trying to capture the essence of what we're trying to get the user to do. So moving forward, asking the task to add context to this slide. Yeah, we're also following up with some, I guess, attitudinal data as well, you know, trying to find out what type of information could you imagine adding to this screen. But again, we're mostly just trying to understand the general functional paths of the concept that we're trying to test. I'll just head back into here. So the goal of testing your prototypes is to quickly improve over multiple short cycles and hopefully moving the fidelity each time onwards and upwards. So a research goal here would be to really determine whether or not the user needs are being met and whether the user experience is ideal. So some example questions we might ask are, how clear was it that you could add context to your slide, or was there anything challenging or unclear about this process? We're assessing both a mixture of behavioural data for task success rates and drop-offs, while at the same time we're listening for more attitudinal data from the open questions in the follow-up after completing a task. So at this stage, once we have all of the stakeholders aligned on the previous iterations and stages of the design process, we move into high fidelity. So in here, this means that all the interface elements are considered, from image assets, icons, typography, and spacing. For the content, most or all of the content that appears here should be representative of the final output. So it is a great idea to bring your content teams into the process as early as possible, but we also see UX writers ideating on copy solutions once the general user journeys are mapped out. And interactivity, we try to make these as realistic as possible. And I'll actually show you this one here in terms of how we can see the slow increase of fidelity here. So we can see the focus on stylistic qualities. We can see animations and transitions are considered, you know, and this is one of the many different high fidelity solutions that we're testing, but we're also just trying to understand, yeah, if the user experience is optimal. Yeah. So one thing to note, I guess, about prototyping is that the change of the use of the prototyping tool depending on where we are in terms of fidelity. So in low fidelity, we're building a very functional click-based mock-up, simple screen-to-screen animation. Mid fidelity, we can start to shift the focus onto the transitions of the screens to support simple modals appearing or side panels. And for high fidelity, we pay attention to the choreography of the element on screen, so you can push this further by influencing let's say, the Bezier curves to simulate different tone of voice or emotions, like floating an element in or it bouncing in. We also find that, of course, these specs here are great in terms of the developer handoff because it's already one-to-one. It's sort of how they would expect to implement it. So when it comes to high fidelity testing, our goal is to measure the usability and identify any issues in the user's workflow. So we tend to find that when creating the tasks for users to complete, we need to be extremely precise in the way we phrase them. And this is even more so when it's unmoderated, as there's no room for any follow-up questions, if things go a little bit sideways in terms of the interpretation. So when we're writing out our tasks, we try to keep in mind a few things. And one is that to match the tasks with the research goals that you have. So if you're hoping to validate a specific journey in your flow, ensure that these tasks stay on point and relevant to the task at hand. Um, and yeah, don't be too specific in this because we don't want to bias them on exactly what they're looking for. So try to avoid specific language that might appear in the interface. So for an example, we would not say, navigate to the report, click the plus button and add context to your slide, as this, it muddies the data that we're trying to learn from. And another one that's good is also adding a scenario for context, because this could be something like, imagine you've just received responses on your recent maze test and you would like to summarize the data before sharing it with stakeholders. So then follow this with a succinct task of visit the maze report. So this helps to, put the user in the mindset that they might, closely be in for the user goals and what they're actually trying to accomplish in the end. And I think maybe another one here is that when we're doing these, well, really all of these tests, we run it by a stakeholder, like an internal one that might not actually be part of the team, because they usually help us to work out any quirks or any issues with the logic of our questioning. But yeah, usually we can get a lot of responses in that. So typical metrics that we're observing here can include like user success rate, path success rate, and we can see here we've got one which is 96%, misclicks, bounce rates, so people that have actually given up on the task. And if you're also measuring these as well, the average duration or time on task. Now, this is good indicators if you are trying to measure or optimize for these metrics, but it is something to keep in mind that you can be shifting your metrics or your success metrics, yeah, as you move along in the process and increasing the fidelity. So we can see in this example here, one of the tasks that we gave user were, you just received a comment on your report from Sabrina. How would you reply back to her? Now, we have one way, which is actually the reply, which would generate a thread, but we also have the other side, which would be to create a new chat. Now, within the early stages and mid-fidelity stages, it wasn't really something that we felt that would be brought out here. But in this case here, we can actually see 4 users had actually started a new comment, which wasn't exactly the task that we were hoping for them to achieve. So from here, we actually take it back to the designers and the product teams and say, hey, we have this information. We need to now iterate on this very small, atomic level for how we can actually improve this so that users can understand it a bit better. So I guess when we're looking at this, we have, I guess, the complementary data, right? We have one, which is the behavioral, which Yola was mentioning, which is what they do. And we can also follow this up with more attitudinal questions like, is there anything you would like to add or improve to the commenting process? So we actually had this follow up and someone said, yeah, the reply button is a little small. It feels like I need to go to the writing section to type reply. So as I mentioned as well, like your product will be tested at the end of the day, whether it actually is in live production code or whether you actually are running through with simulations before it actually reaches your users. It's a great idea, and there's not really many opportunities to understand this type of data when it's actually live. So, now we have, I guess, some ways that we speed up our workflow. And I guess it all starts with our document templates. So we create consistency. And so in order to save time and at least keep everyone, I guess, aligned across all of our documents, we set up our files with the same page titles while keeping testing as a focus. And I can actually show you one that we had here inside this maze report. So we have our project info, which, looked at the general topic. We have handoff, which actually looks at the specific task or at least a piece or a user story that we'd be solving for. And so I can zoom in here and show you. So this would be the user journey that they would go through. I'll just close this one. So UI, add text to slide, new text area is created, and content is filled in. We also have then the specs that are actually provided so that we can actually understand what is a mouse off the slide, mouse on, what actually happens in terms of this, add new button appearing. We also then can include, button interactions where we start to specify the resting states when it's not on the slide, of a slide, hover over a button, and then the additional tooltip that appears. So this slide is really, this page inside our document is really for the developer handover. And I think, as Lewis mentioned, this is where all your layers should be named. We also have the playground, which is the very scrappy place. So this is very daunting if you're not exactly working on this project. So you can come in here and see a whole range of different explorations. But this is where we're sort of really messing around and looking at different ideas. And once we have, I guess, some general journeys that we want to test, we then move them into our testing flows. So we can see here in terms of the concept testing, and we have our goals that are written here. We also have, say, add remove context, where we've added, the goals of the test. And then, of course, then these high fidelity prototypes. Just move this on, where we can see all of the very detailed interactions and paths that the prototype would take. What else do we have? Yeah, so for the question components, this is something that we built internally, and it's helpful to quickly throw questions into a user journey or to capture our ideas or thoughts. So we built these really, well, mostly for us, but we're also thinking of releasing this in terms of putting into the community. But we built these to drag and drop questions into our flows and to help us generate the discussion around the overall test structure. I can show you what that one looks like here. So we have our question template. So we can see there's a very exhaustive list of all different types of questions that you could ask, because it is sometimes hard to get off on the right foot. So we see, open questions, yes, no questions, opinion scales. So this is not really, specific to Maze. This is also just for building your own usability tests that you run in person. But of course, we build our own little helpers for ourselves. And so we have all these questions here, but we also have, well, these are available on the Maze website, but we have ones that are specific for use cases. So if you want to test feature discoverability, test label clarity, we have these already built in, so you can just drag and drop them in. Now, of course, they are flexible in the sense that if you did want to, let's say, start a new task, a new journey, let's say here, I'll just start here. Maze template. So we can, let's say you want to test your website sign up flow. We just drag and drop this one in. And yes, it is okay to detach from symbol here. But so we have this very loose. But what you can also do is, let's say you wanted to change any of them, opinion. We have all these questions here that are part of our own little component library. And you can drag and drop this one. How's your overall experience? And you can replace this one if you like. So the other way that we use it as well is that when we have these overall broad journeys, let's say you have mission and you want to test something specifically, we would just say mission empty, drag it in here, and we would just, start to say, this one, navigate through the report. And so we drag these across and we just sort of add discussions around them. So at this point here, we can see Yola had mentioned what was the purpose and content of this information pop-up. So we need to understand if maybe this was understood here, so more just like a recognition and recall test. But yeah, we can start to see this discussion being generated around the entire flow. And then once we're sort of happy with the general, the key points that we'd like to test, we then start to construct it into something that we bring to users. I think also what's important as well is to really make the most of plugins. Now, this has been super helpful for us because when we are dealing with, high rate of iteration, we are trying to look at any opportunities to speed up that workflow. So we can either use things like content reel, which we use, which helps you, drag and drop or like place different images inside your early stage mockups. Tiny image, which is also super helpful because I guess if you do have the user waiting and loading on the assets, then it also is a bit of a poor experience and doesn't stimulate that realistic one that we're hoping for. So this one helps to compress. We have find and replace, which is great for if we see there's maybe like issues with UX copy, we can instantly find and replace all of the different instances in which this copy appears. QR codes, where we can quickly send this to our, well, anyone internally or also to stakeholders. This at least generates a QR code that you can quickly load up a prototype. And as well, icons, which we just, in this earlier stage, when we haven't gone into that small, the finesse stage of high fidelity, we just drag and drop these icons in, so at least you can communicate the message that we're hoping to. So some takeaways, I guess, when building your tests and going through this iterative process is most crucially, I would say, is to don't fall in love with your first idea. So at every stage, you should really be aiming to seek criticism and not praise. And I think this is a good way to not become too attached to your ideas until you start to build confidence from user feedback. I'd also say to make time for iterations. So in the software world, I have to admit that the time to release can be incredibly short. And I have been caught on in receiving feedback a little bit too late in the cycle to be able to have enough time to revise the solution. So therefore, I really recommend to try and test early and often to ensure you have enough time for refining your solution. And I guess finally, testing really is a team sport. So try to get the whole team involved. And I don't mean that in the sense of just sharing back the learnings. I mean, bring them in with you across the entire process. So whether that's helping you to define research goals or simply doing a dry run of your test, it helps to keep the user focus. That is all we have for today. Thank you very much for joining. And I think we can open it up to some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. That was really, really great. I'm just going to pull up the Q&A screen and then start to fire away some questions. We've got some fantastic questions from the community and I've collected some myself. So I'm going to go ahead and ask them. So the first question for you is that sort of Figma related, Figma centric, is that what is it about Figma specifically that allows you to validate those ideas a lot faster?
Want to take this one, Yola, or me? I don't know if she's there. I think really.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, sorry. You can take it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that you can work together with your team in the real life and you can iterate really fast. You can also create templates that speed up your process, like design process and testing process. That's the key to
that. With regards to the files themselves, I noticed that your files are incredibly well organized and that you're using libraries really effectively as well, with a really robust naming convention. How were you doing that before Figma?
This might be a question for you, Yola. I joined 6 months ago. So.
I think it was more messy. Like we try to organize that, but not at that level. And right now we are really proud.
It's great work. And it looks like that you can work a lot faster, at least. Now with those libraries.
We also create like a workshop together with our design team, where we try to find the best solution for all of us, how we want to structurize our files, and how we will structure our files to explain that to engineers and the marketing team and UX copywriters, so that it's easier to navigate inside the files.
And that's a workshop you run inside of Figma?
Yeah.
Great. There's actually a question earlier about your templates. People would love to be able to see those, and I think possibly you can get those shared into the community as well.
Yeah, I was translating them across. So there was like the team that worked on that had a lot of a lot of effort in there. So it's super amazing what they did. We were translating them back into Figma, and I started to calculate how long it would be to make all of them. So we don't have them just for design use cases. It's also for like product management, product validation and concept testing. There's a whole range that you can check out, but I think we're going to fully flesh this out, and then for sure we're looking into publishing that so you can speed up your workflow.
Great. So do you have your product managers, developers coming into Figma working in the same files together then?
Yep.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Yola.
Go on.
I mean, we have everyone actually using Figma. So I would say though that Figma was really something that the designers would almost own the domain here. But we are starting to see that with FigJam, it starts to shift the ownership, to the team, because it is, there is a much more, well, it's a whole different product, right? And essentially they've really focused on that collaboration aspect. So they've got the very, functional aspects of sticky notes and, pen tools, but then you've also maxed out on the delight side, which is obviously then the fun aspect. So then people are looking forward to using it. But yeah, I would say that's sort of where the shift is.
It's great to hear. We are definitely seeing an uptake from product managers, particularly with FigJam. And we actually ran a live stream last week with FigJam for product managers as well. So if anybody's interested, head over to our YouTube channel and check that out.
Yeah.
Right at the front of the presentation, you mentioned that everybody in the team is responsible for product delivery. I was wondering whether you've ever entered in these situations where you've effectively got too many cooks in the kitchen and how you kind of navigate that as a design team.
Mm, I think because we're dividing that into like risk, so it's also divided into responsibilities. Everyone know what's their main responsibility. They can ask a question, but we as a designer, we're taking care of usability, and that's our main goal. So I think that everyone knows their boundaries.
But I think to go on that as well, that I wouldn't say that too many cooks in the kitchen could, well, in terms of the ideation phase, we're trying to capture as much and as many inputs as possible, not just from stakeholders, like from the teams, not just from developers, product managers, product designers, also from like other parts of the organization too. Because of course, think of sales teams, they're also on the front line of customer requests, also for the support teams as well. So we also try to bring as many people into this ideation phase. It's when it comes to the prioritization of features, then of course we're still actively contributing, but I think that it's mostly coming from users, when also then, the assessment of the, effort impact matrix and things that we can actually achieve and get done.
Great. So on the note of sort of validation internally and externally, I know that a lot of design teams actually struggle to get sign off or budget for things like user research. What advice would you give to those teams to push that further down the road?
I think start small. You don't need to have a lot of tester. You don't need to have a like, full tester repository. You can test your design either with the surveys or usability, remote usability tests with your coworkers, with your mailing list, your social media. And after that, you have some data you can share with your stakeholders or your PMs and show the actual value of research. And that's also like a speed up time of developing really valuable design.
We've also seen, I guess also, like, I think that selling the value of research, which Yola mentioned, but really understanding what their interpretation of research is as well, because their experience might also be different. It could just be like, we've done surveys before, they don't work, but really understanding what is their perception of research. You could probably even share this with like a lunch and learn, like a share back over a lunchtime. It's obviously free to, and people, of course, looking for topics to learn about new things. So it's probably a good way to share the vision of what research is. I'd also say that there's a lot of tools out there you can get up and running for free. So you wouldn't really need to have a lot of, I guess, upfront, costs in terms of getting started with research to really start to get some early insights. And yeah, I'd probably just say like the numbers, or at least the stories that you tell, should speak volumes for themselves. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for any new thing we want to introduce as designers, whether that's research or design systems or a better way of copywriting, starting on a real atomic level, just like we do with our components, is going to enable everybody to see it. And I think that seeing it really is the way to convince people that it's the right thing to do. Just as Yola said, is starting very small, a little test, rolling out and saying, hey, look, we actually saw some impact or some significant impact on that test. If we didn't, then we know that that test didn't work, and we know that we tested it and validated that assumption. So I think that getting those assumptions out the door and getting right into results is the best way to do that. On the note of sort of getting started and doing those tests, people also struggle with actually recruiting testers. What sort of avenues can people explore when they are going through those problems of trying to get people who actually want to have a go on their ideas and test them out?
So It's easier for us to say that because we already have a backlog of a tester of the clients. But if you still don't have that, you can test on the thematic Facebook group. You can source your tester into your email list, Twitter with appropriate hashtag. What else? In-app messaging if you're working in that type of product. You can call your teammates. You can do guerrilla testing. Go to the coffee shop and ask people to fill your survey or do moderate testing with you. There's a lot of ways to do that. I know this is a really painful process, um, but start small and you realize the way to gather your tester you need.
Great. And Claudia has asked, how do you organize your client or users' feedback? Do you just throw it straight into FigJam or do you synthesize it somewhere else? And what's the sort of process that you go through when you've got all those results to analyze?
Yeah.
Uh,
No, just, I mean, the recent one that you ran, that more discovery work, maybe you want to share a bit of information about that
so
one?
basically, we're jamming inside FigJam. So there was a lot of posting notes, a lot of comments on top of that, and we were synthesized that inside Notion pages. So we just have a tables like all database, and we're just trying to find um, same goal or group them thematically. We try to find the main pain points, the repetitive answers. Um, yeah, but this is a really, really painful process, as I said before, as you need to rewrite everything or just synthesize the information you get from the post-it notes. But in no matter if you're doing a remote on in person, it's the same process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that speaking of friction and issues with regards to the research process, Nafia has asked a fantastic question of when we do have that tight deadline and the client is asking us for something tomorrow, what's the best way to validate something fast? Or is it too late to validate those ideas? What would your advice be to somebody who does go through that in a very real way? I think we've all been through that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, guilty of that one. I would say it's not really too late to test really at any moment. I think that, well, there is a lot of tools that can get you up and running in terms of testing. I guess if you're really in that more like discovery phase, it could be a bit harder to actually, bust together some designs and actually have something presented. But if it is more about understanding the user journeys and testing the usability of a flow, it can be done. And I think that is one of the huge benefits of remote unmoderated is that you are not, time bound, geographically bound. You can also test it in different languages if you want to do that. So speaking from our own experience, when we send out mazes, it's almost like, pulling a refresh on Instagram to see if we've got any more responses. It's a pretty exciting time. So we keep refreshing that, and even over the next day, we can see like, oh, we've got 5 new responses, 10 new responses. So I think that if you do make the most of unmoderated and remote, you can actually get some answers very fast, and at least bring a bit more confidence in the way you present. I mean, we can also still see that people are testing as they're in production as well, right? Because you can still make some pivots or changes, although of course you probably don't want to leave it to there, but I'd still say never too late.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also very important that if we have a timeline, that we stick to a timeline. If something does come up last minute that wasn't factored in, that wasn't budgeted for, we should have the confidence to say that either it's going to happen in the next phase of the development, or that that test is probably not appropriate right now as we're launching the product. So there's a lots of things to balance, and I think that going back to what Yola said earlier about starting incredibly small, and if there is something that does need to be tested last minute, how can we break that down into measurable chunks that we can release on a safe timeline for the release of our products.
I think also like people build up the stress around testing. Like they think that they need to share like perfect prototype with the tester, but it's not. You can start just with sketching and sharing a image for inside. Do you understand this layout or something like that? You don't have to have like animation and all transition. Just start really small, baby steps.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Julia's asked a question that's slightly different, but I think it's a good question anyway, is about your design system and how you manage that. Who's responsible for making those updates? How do you manage the permissions and that sort of stuff inside of Figma? How does that look like?
You want to go, Yola?
Go.
I mean, so we're all still, we're a very small team, so we have 4. We are scaling at the moment. So right now it is very much all hands on deck. We actually have wonderful designer, Sabrina, who's actually managing and owning the design system. However, we do have our sessions, to review the components that are being contributed to the system. And we also have our review sessions of currently what's working and what's not. But I would say that it's still in an early stage, right? So we have been working with this for 6 months. So we are learning, it's not just about building, and designing for the components. It's about rollout and implementation inside the tech organization as well. So we are still learning about these things, but yeah, at this stage we are very much all very hands-on in terms of actively contributing to the system.
I'm the serial detacher. Sorry, Sabrina, my son. I know you're watching.
I think it's important for every team to realize that a design system is never finished. And
Yeah.
even 6 months in is still very early on the development of a long-term mature system. So don't feel nervous that you are detaching components. It's absolutely fine. Figma does facilitate that, and that allows you to get those libraries up and running quickly. And it's good to hear that you have that collaborative process to the design system management as well as the user research side, which actually leads me quite nicely on to the next question, actually, which is research is something that's becoming, I think, something that everybody thinks they need to be doing. And at the same time, we need to appreciate that maybe not everybody's got all those skills. And it'd be great to hear your perspective on whether every designer should be doing research or whether that should be a designated position in a team. How do you approach that?
I think if you're not confident with all research or asking a lot of questions, you can leave like a generative broad research for a UX team or research team. But I think we are also, as a designer, we should validate our design through evaluative research, just to know if our design are good, are we going in the right direction. So you don't need to ask a lot of questions, just to check your flow. If you're doing your job right, your idea are not an actual based idea. I know this is heartbreaking, but you're not the final user, and we know that. So I will recommend testing just a little bit if you're not confident with that, but still. Test maybe what some of the actual user of your product.
Yeah, I think that even the word test can be quite scary. If we open that up and sort of break that wall down to, can somebody give me some feedback? I think the easiest way to start getting yourself into the rhythm of testing your own ideas is to share it with your team, whether that's pasting a screenshot of your designs into Slack or Teams or whatever you're using, whether that's having a weekly design crit with the team, just to show people what you're working on. We make the design process more collaborative by nature, encourage a culture of feedback more regularly, more often. We're naturally going to land at the door where we're looking for other people for validation on our ideas. And right before you know it, you're actually doing user testing very regularly. It's either with your team or it's with a broader organization outside. So I think we keep coming back to that. Start as small as you can and just make it in incremental steps, atomic mindset with all of our designs and our research. And everybody should be moving pretty fast along that direction of success in no time. The sort of a linked question as well is, what other positions in our product organization or teams should be baking research into their routines? I'm assuming the answer is everybody, but I wanted to get your perspective on whether product managers, engineers, salespeople should be getting into that rhythm of testing as well.
Yeah, you said. I mean, everyone should, I guess, adopt the testing mindset. So it's interesting. I always find that there is a a great degree of emphasis on what users are doing. Like let's pull up the data from Amplitude or Hotjar to see how people are performing to help us really, what is the data on this to help us make the decisions of if we should pursue something. It's funny that I feel like there is also I guess, a need to also assess that while you're also building the new thing, that you should be, looking at what's actually working. So what are the data and what are the numbers saying? What's the responses been? So I think that there is a general excitement for research, and we can see that being, not just within the product teams, but also, from product marketing managers. But yeah, I would say that the research could be baked into a lot of different, just size of the business. We even see, people team, they run their own research tests, customer, happiness inside the company, or, just very light level, like planning offsites or whatever it is. So there is a research mindset that a lot of different, departments inside the organization can adopt. But yeah, I would say that's it does happen. And I guess, yeah. What was that, Yola?
No, everyone, like
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone, all the time.
Yeah, that's my answer, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Just 2 more questions then before we do wrap up.
Right.
Second to last question is, I saw that you actually rely on wireframing quite a lot for your early validation. I was wondering whether you ever find that results differ significantly between the low and high fidelity designs or not.
I think sometimes as we are adding additional pop of color, so there is a more chaos on the screens. When we add in icons that are not that clear to everyone, because sometimes low fidelity flows are really simple. You need to click there, unclick that. But if we add an additional copy and a lot of noise to the screen, sometimes we need to change also a flow.
Yeah. Okay, great. Last question before we do wrap up, and it's a big hitter. How do you straddle or walk that line with engaging with your customers enough, but then also not wanting to hassle them for too much input all the time?
Yeah, that's a good one. I guess it's like that's a hard balance, right? So we do have, of course, we make sure that we aren't contacting people on a frequent basis, like in the past 30 days, have they, been reached out to with whatever communication. So we do try to make sure that we're not just, blasting the same customers over. We are also filtering for specific demographics, like particular user actions they take inside the product. But yeah, so we make sure that we're not, of course, overdoing it in that side. The other thing is that we do have then like the customer advisory board, which we have, which it's more like an established agreement that we will reach out to them to, discuss certain ideas. And this is more of a very friendly communication rather than just like it's a one-way dialogue. So yeah, I think it is a hard balance, right? But yeah, I think just make sure that you have this in place, to not, of course, keep accessing the same user base, because it would be an extended organization, right? You can do testing inside, which is for us is like 40, 50 people. And if you are just, asking the same 20 people, you've really only extended your sample size to a certain amount. So yeah, try to get a broad range and start to collect responses from, the extremes, design to the extremes and work for the middle.
And I will also recommend adding additional message when you're sharing your link. Write down the background for your research, so people are really interested in the subject will answer that, and they'll be less stressed that you're spamming them. So just write a short note with the information about what the survey is about or a test is about. That is really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. That was really engaging, and your answers were great to all those hard questions. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining, and we'll see you all very soon.
Thanks everyone.
Very much.